Hello, 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 everybody. Welcome to GitHub Community Web3, GitHub's Web3 Community Call. I am excited to be back. Sorry we missed you all last week. We had GitHub Universe. I hope you all tuned into some of those shows. If you haven't, it's on YouTube. I suggest you really watch it. It's very interesting. I was very excited about our command palette of all the products. Clearly, I also love Copilot, but I've been using that for a while. But Command Palette was the one I really loved. And then, yes, the video on DevOps was absolutely amazing. It was very much Disney's, what's that show with the woman? Oh, the thing with the woman, Disney Channel that we all watching. She's married to Vision. Wonder Vision. It was very much Wonder Vision. And I loved every minute of it. My camera is going to come right back. But today, we're not talking about One Division. We're not talking about Marvel. We're talking about a new kind of thing to marvel at. Today, we're going to be talking about decentralized infrastructure. And I'm very excited about this topic because right now we are in NFT mania. I think this week is NFT NYC. It's been interesting seeing all those tweets and seeing those crypto punks in Times Square. And the question is, when you go down the stack from a developer perspective, what's actually underneath the stack? What is the infrastructure that allows all this to happen? And to talk about that, I have invited Luke Youngblood from Coinbase. And before Coinbase, Luke was at AWS Cloud. And so, Luke, welcome to our show. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself so we can just set context and why we're having this conversation?
Thank you so much for having me today, Omoju. It's great to be here. So yeah, let me just give you a quick intro on my background. I've worked in tech for a couple decades, and I started as a systems engineer and a network engineer in the late 90s in the first .com boom. And I found myself at Amazon Web Services as a solution architect, helping really large customers migrate to the cloud around 2016 timeframe. I've worked in tech for a couple decades, but I started in crypto back in 2011. I got interested in mining Bitcoin just as a hobby on my gaming PC in my free time. And crypto was always a hobby while I worked at my day job in tech. And it wasn't until I was working at AWS and I started, it was about 2017 at the time. And my brother and I started hacking on Ethereum smart contract development in our spare time. So on the weekends, we were hacking on Solidity a little bit, and we ended up getting a great opportunity to sort of build proof of stake infrastructure. So for those of you that are familiar with Bitcoin and Ethereum today, the consensus algorithm uses proof of work.
Yeah.
Which is very energy intensive. But there are new technologies that have come out several years ago, proof of stake, which is very energy efficient and green technology. And so we started building proof of stake infrastructure for layer 1 networks that were launching, Tezos and Cosmos. And then that was what brought me to Coinbase.
Wait, stop. You were building all this as an open source side gig while doing
that's right.
Did you sleep?
Not very much. It was a really exciting time, though. I mean, we were working on nights and weekends, and then we also had our day jobs. I was still working at AWS. So my brother and I started a company called Blockscale. And even though we started doing smart contract development and we wanted to build dApps, we quickly ended up pivoting into building infrastructure for proof of stake layer 1 networks. And this was kind of fun for me because I got a chance to combine my skills as an AWS architect with my hobby in crypto, and I could bring sort of like the DevOps and the infrastructure as code that I had, the skill sets I had built up on the tech side to like the crypto side, which is this brand new, kind of wild west of new networks launching. And it was a really fun time. We built out proof of stake infrastructure. We were Genesis validators for both the Tezos and Cosmos networks. And then that's what brought me to Coinbase, because Coinbase started talking to some of the founders of these networks, and they asked them, who's really good at infrastructure in this space, and they recommended me. So Coinbase sort of acqui-hired me back in 2019, and I've been at Coinbase the last 2.5, almost 3 years now. It's been a really fun experience at Coinbase. I've been building out our staking rewards products. So as you know, many of our customers want to hold crypto, but also earn more crypto, and so staking rewards are a way you can do that, and you can also help secure the proof of stake networks just in the same way that miners secure the Bitcoin and Ethereum proof of work networks, validators or stakers kind of secure the layer 1 consensus protocol for proof of stake networks. And so it's been really fun building those products at Coinbase. And now I'm working on the Coinbase cloud side. And so we're building a lot of really great tooling for developers that are coming into the Web3 ecosystem. And we're building an entire suite of developer-friendly services so that you can get up and running without building a lot of infrastructure yourself. So that's kind of my background.
Wait, are you telling me is Coinbase going into developer tools?
We are, yes, most definitely. Yeah, and so you might have seen our Coinbase Cloud website, which was just launched maybe a month or two ago, and it talks about the full suite of tooling. But just like others in this space, like Infura and Alchemy API, Alchemy is a Coinbase Ventures company that we invested in, provide tooling to developers that are getting started in Web3, so that they don't have to worry about running nodes and other infrastructure. We also provide cloud infrastructure for developers that want to start building on Web3 without having to provision nodes and do a lot of the heavy lifting.
I love this. I never really thought about Coinbase as a cloud infrastructure company. So it's good to actually see this happening, because you do what I did a lot of that stuff myself. And I think I went through the long way of Ethereum.org, reading documentation and doing things like this step and that step and this step and that step and this step. And to me, it seemed straightforward enough. But then that's because I'm used to developing, I understand DevOps and all that. So it doesn't seem like a mental challenge. But the average person, I don't think you'd want to go through reading everything on the web and stringing it together. So it's amazing that we are having more and more people build developer tooling for Web3 infrastructure specifically. And then as we're talking about that, I would be remiss to say, GitHub is the home of DevOps. We want to be the home of DevOps. We have all these tools, and like infrastructure as code is such a powerful idea. All of Web3, maybe all is too strong a word, but majority of Web3 projects exist on GitHub, and they are built on that layer of open source where we're sharing, where we're pulling. And not just the best part of it now is not just you're pulling the code for the smart contract or the protocol, but you're also pulling all their DevOps as well. So if a Web3 project is out there, I will urge all of you to really spend time building out your repo very well and putting all your GitHub actions and all these things in there and testing everything to make sure that it works and it's sound. You just make it easier for the next people who are going to come ahead of you, because they can just fork that action and have everything set up, versus having to just, I have the smart contract, I have all that code, but now I need to go get code for all the other infrastructure stuff.
Yeah, it was really interesting when I first started working with crypto projects. It was probably around 2016, 2017. And one of the first projects that I worked with was MyCrypto. The team, it's an open source wallet. And it was super interesting to me because I was used to building, websites with, centralized infrastructure and things like, you use an S3 bucket, you use a content distribution network, you use all these, cloud tooling. And what was really fascinating is when I started working with the MyCrypto team, it's like 100 different open source developers. Most are part-time. There's a few full-time, and everyone was just building on GitHub in an open source way, and they were deploying their entire wallet and website with GitHub Actions to GitHub Pages, and it was just this. It was this entirely self-contained ecosystem, and it was so easy for them to ship new versions. GitHub Pages, it was fascinating to me because I didn't realize that this free service that is available to all open source developers could actually serve a wallet that is used by hundreds of thousands of people globally. And the way they did that was they just put a content distribution network in front of GitHub Pages. I think they use Cloudflare in front of GitHub Pages. And they now have this highly available website that never goes down, and they never have to worry about operating web servers or running Apache or any of the things we used to have to do back in the day.
Yeah, it's fascinating how quickly we can go now from idea to bringing your idea out of your head and sending somebody a link to go use the thing. Like, we're just making that, it's getting shorter and shorter and shorter and shorter and shorter. But before we get lost in CDNs and such, I think the thing on everybody's mind, which is something people ask me all the time. So a little bit of background about myself. I have been in tech for the entirety of my career, which is going almost like 20 years now. And I was telling Luke earlier that I was part of the original Web3. We called it Semantic Web. And I was doing the Semantic Web research. And it was the same kind of idea of building a trustless web, permissionless web. However, our approach was by using semantic tags on HTML on the existing layer of the web that we had then, but we didn't bring economics to it. We did not solve the incentive problem. Why are people going to annotate these tags? They're not going to. There needs to be some kind of economic push. Game theory. We didn't bring economics. There was no game theory, so that didn't work. However, some of those ideas are still valid. Everything on the semantic web was supposed to have a URI. So it's unique. You can find it. And the URI don't go away. The URI has come back. And we're seeing it in Web3 now in the metadata for NFTs. And the thing people talk to me all about, especially with NFTs, is where exactly are these NFTs stored? Where is this thing? And how decentralized is that storage solution? So could you walk us through? I go on OpenSea or Foundation and I buy an NFT.
Yeah.
What are the layers? Where is the raw bytes? Where does the raw bytes that constitute the image or media I purchase? Where are those bytes sitting?
Great question. So let's walk through this a little bit. So it all started in 2014 with the Ethereum network and the world computer, right? We have to thank Vitalik and all of the creators of Ethereum for building this world computer. And the real revolution there is that now everyone can interact with basically a shared database in a permissionless way. So there's no gatekeeper or central authority you have to ask permission to either read from this database or add to this database or modify things in this database. And so that's the beautiful part of the world computer, is this shared state where we can store data and we can also transfer value in a permissionless and trustless way. And so it all starts there. And then there's a token standard called ERC 721 that was created, and that's the most popular NFT token standard. So if you mint an NFT, let's say I'm an artist and I want to mint an NFT, so I can go ahead and create an ERC 721 contract on Ethereum. It's called originating a contract. Anyone can do this. It's permissionless, anyone with a laptop. And I can basically, inside that contract, we store data. And you mentioned this earlier, it's called URI metadata, Universal Resource Identifier, URI metadata. And it's basically a small amount of JSON that stores information about this NFT. Now, what we've seen so far, the most popular use case, of course, is art, right?
Yeah.
People want to store these beautiful images of artwork. But the art itself is really hard to store on Ethereum because Ethereum is expensive to store data. It's very difficult for us to store, megabytes or gigabytes of data on the layer 1 network itself. So in many cases today, the URI metadata is actually linking you to an image that's stored externally on some hosting solution. Now, this is where it gets tricky. It could be centralized hosting, in which case you might have to worry about the centralized provider or the cloud provider going offline or going out of business a few years from now, and your image might disappear. But in many cases now, this art is being stored in decentralized storage networks. And there's a couple of great examples of this. IPFS is one. That's probably the most popular and it's the earliest. And then Arweave is a relatively newer one. And there are others like Filecoin and SIA that I don't really want to get into right now. But the interesting thing about these decentralized storage is that now we can have more permanent art. Okay, so now the link to an external object might be stored in IPFS, and it could last for a long time. Or in Arweave, it can actually last forever. And so this is sort of the interesting thing about Arweave, is this decentralized storage network where I can pay about $40 a gigabyte, and I can store data, whether it's images, music, art, in a permanent way. And then the miners that contribute to that network, just like Bitcoin miners, are providing file storage, and they're compensated for keeping that storage online and serving those images as they're requested. Now let me pause there and see what other questions you have, because there's a whole bunch of other infrastructure layers we can talk about in the NFT space.
Yes, I want to actually go, if possible, and permit me, I want to go layer by layer by layer. So you've got URI, it's JSON.
Yep.
The JSON has a pointer to a URL, and that URL, we go to it, it's either centralized or decentralized hosting. If it's centralized hosting, then I know that my image is in this cloud provider, and then that's the end of it, right? If it's decentralized hosting, then my image has been chopped up and distributed all over the world by this miner type host hosting those images. When I request for the centralized image, how is it aggregated back? Is my image in one person's thing, or is it distributed globally?
So this is where it gets tricky also. All of these decentralized storage networks like IPFS and Arweave, they don't necessarily have tons of internet bandwidth, right? These are, in many cases, miners operating at home. They could be hobbyists. They could be professional miners in a data center, but they may not necessarily have terabits of internet bandwidth that they can serve all these images through. So what they rely on are called gateways. And a good example of a gateway is Cloudflare. So Cloudflare operates a centralized IPFS gateway. And by doing this, what they do is they have connections to the IPFS network. They run IPFS nodes, and then they run a caching service that can basically cache those objects and serve them to the rest of the internet through their global content distribution network. So now we can sort of cache those objects and images that are most frequently requested, and we can serve them globally on internet backbones that have terabits a second of internet bandwidth. And so we can kind of scale the distribution of these images to the point where now millions of people can view them and enjoy them.
All right, so that makes a lot of sense to me. So in perpetuity, the images are distributed, but the pipe to get it to everybody still goes through a trusted third party.
That's right. And I think we'll start to see some decentralized content distribution networks in the near future. I mean, the technology is probably in its early days, but it seems inevitable that just like the world computer is decentralizing data storage, that blockchain technology is going to eventually decentralize content distribution networks as well. If I can pay a fraction of a penny to have you serve me an image, maybe I don't need to pay Cloudflare anymore. So it's very interesting to see what will happen in the future with these gateways.
Because I was just, as you were saying this, I was thinking about, okay, there's an image. In my mind, everything is going to be non-fungible, pretty much. Majority of the content is going to be non-fungible. So then I'm now thinking about the next layer. So I saw yesterday that Quentin Tarantino is releasing on never before seen scenes from Pulp Fiction as NFTs. So now this is video content. Maybe it's 10 minutes long, maybe it's 5 minutes long. One can see in the future where you're going to have entire movies, something that is 3 hours long, video, become non-fungible, and then you just get to watch it. And what will be the pipes needed to be able to serve that? Because basically what we're talking about is a decentralized version of Netflix.
Yeah.
What kind of technology
it's going to happen
to be able to do that level of streaming globally?
So that's a great question. So I think if I think about how to build that, basically it's decentralizing the content distribution network. And there are some interesting new startups in this space. There's a decentralized network called Skynet, which is basically building that sort of content distribution network type of solution where I can not only store data, but I can also serve data, and then the people that serve those files or those images or objects of data, whatever they happen to be, can be compensated in small amounts of cryptocurrency for providing and serving those files. And so it's creating a network where you can not only potentially serve thousands or hundreds of thousands or millions of requests per second, but then the people that are serving those requests can also be compensated with microtransactions for their infrastructure that they're providing to the network. And so I think we'll see more and more of those. That's just one example of an early network that is working on tackling that problem of not only, how do we serve content to millions of people across the internet in a decentralized way, but also how do we make sure the people that are providing the data centers, the infrastructure, the internet bandwidth can actually be compensated for providing that in a decentralized and trustless way. It's really fascinating to think about what's going to come.
When you start to think about it, it really, really is. And the interesting thing about Web3 for me is that it's one of the areas where I see, you go to school for computer science, but you hardly ever use computer science. You end up doing software engineering. In the Web3 environment, computer science is real because the challenges are such that it's not necessarily building an application and serving an application. You have these challenges of distributed systems. And it's all about scaling everything to the T while still maintaining the latency that you need. And so that's another thing. How do you actually maintain the latency? Can I get to the content? Yes. How long does it take me to get to the content? What is the performance associated with this approach?
Yeah, and I think these are some of the challenges of building trustless decentralized systems is that, so in a trustless system, well, let's talk about centralized first. In a centralized system like S3, I store the data 3 times. I store 3 copies of the data in different data centers in case there's a bad internet weather day in one data center. But in a decentralized system, I might have to store many more copies because I don't necessarily have the same level of reliability guarantees that I would in a traditional data center. So I might distribute more and more copies. And then I have to build in systems to incentivize those people that are storing all the copies and serving them. So for example, one thing that is very commonly used is for these data providers or miners to provide proof of liveness of the data. Prove to me that you can read my data back that you've stored, months ago. And so they will be constantly providing these proofs to the rest of the network just to prove that they still have the data, they haven't lost it. And that increases the latency, obviously, because all of these messages and the coordination that has to happen between the various network participants in a really trustless way, right? We make assumptions that the majority of the network participants are honest and are not trying to attack the network.
Yes.
And so, but we have to always, trust but verify and check that people are honest. They are storing the data the way they promised, and that they are continuing to serve the data, that it's live. And so building these systems is extremely hard and it requires a lot more redundancy than you might have in a more centralized system. Yeah.
Can we talk about proof of liveness? How do you do proof of liveness?
So one way that you can prove liveness of the data might be to use a hashing algorithm. So obviously, I don't want to serve the entire file to you just to prove that I have it. But you might ask me, hash this byte range of the file, tell me what the hash is. And then I can just check to make sure that that matches what I expect it to be. And so there are ways that we can, with cryptographic primitives, like hashes and things like that, we can basically prove that we have access to the data without actually sending you the data. And there's a whole area of zero knowledge proofs in cryptography that is super interesting. The idea that I could prove to you that I have an image of a genuine Bored Ape or something, and that is my Bored Ape without actually sending it to you is super interesting. But then there's all sorts of things there's all sorts of other cryptographic use cases, things like, for example, digital identities. Maybe I want to prove to you that I live in a certain state, or prove to you my date of birth is I'm older than a certain age, but I don't want to share that personally identifiable information with you because my data might get breached. There's ways with zero knowledge proofs in cryptography we can do that without actually sharing the underlying data itself. Super interesting.
That is so exciting, especially when applications that use those proofs come to the market. Because if you think about it right now, how many times do you go through life and you have to share your social security number? You have to share this, you have to share that, you have to share all this information. And it allows data breaches. So basically the challenge of PII is done. We just need to deploy this technology. And we no longer have to be afraid of like data leakage and you accidentally leak PII.
Yeah. One thing that I'm really excited about with Web3 and NFTs.
Personally identifiable information. I realize I'm using acronyms that people may not know.
So one thing that I'm really excited about with Web3 and NFTs in general is just the opportunities it makes for the creator community. You know, when I was younger in my 20s and I used to DJ, I played electronic music, house music, and a lot of my friends that were artists, musicians, creators, you know, they struggled because it's so hard to make a living as a professional creator in this world. And, you know, I know so many brilliant musicians that have never made it to the mainstream, and it's so hard to become, you know, picked up by a label. And now I see these musicians and these artists, they're actually able to reach an audience, and they're able to create work and be compensated for that work in ways that they never were able to before. And it's really incredible because it's opening up, you know, basically I listened to this really interesting podcast with Chris Dixon and Naval Ravikant.
Oh my God.
It's the Tim Ferriss podcast.
Yes,
did you listen
I have
to that?
listened to it 2.5 hours. Yeah. I listened to it a few days ago. And the idea of the true 1,000 fans, which has been an idea that's been around for forever. But now you can actually scale that for real. You can serve your true 1,000 and make a living from doing that. Yeah,
it's for those that haven't heard the podcast. The idea is that, you know, every creator or artist in the world, if they can connect with their 1,000 fans, and they could be anywhere in the world, they can probably make a living, right? All it takes is 1,000 good fans that maybe donate a few bucks, and you can make a living in most countries in the world. And so the idea is that there are so many artists and creators out there that are just unrecognized and don't know how to express themselves in a way that can lead to, you know, a better outcome for their financial health. And it's going to open up so many opportunities. And there are examples in this podcast. I mean, musicians like Blau, who's an electronic music musician. He's not a like top tier artist in the sense that he's not, you know, going to be in the pop charts or anything. However, he was able to launch an NFT and bring in, you know, a lot
millions,
of,
I think
millions of dollars with his NFT launch. Yeah, and he's also launching a new streaming platform called Royal, which will allow, fans to basically own a percentage of the music that he's creating and other artists are creating, and they can actually have ownership in the creators and artists that they follow. So, for example, you might be able to, as a super fan, you could buy an ownership right in some artist's music, and then you would get royalties as they sell that music on streaming services and globally. And so I think this is going to create this new revolution where a lot of intermediaries are going to be disrupted. The record labels, the music industry in general, the art industry in general, all the gatekeepers, all the auction houses that are, you know, charging outrageous fees for artists to sell their work are going to be disrupted by this new decentralized technology. And it's going to empower the creators and the fans of those creators to just experience their art and music in new ways. It's so exciting to me to see this opportunity for all my starving friends that were never able to really make it in the music business to have these opportunities today is just incredible.
It's very exciting to think about in our lifetime, in you and I's lifetime, the phrase starving artist may go out of fashion, because we could actually solve that whole portion. And it's not necessarily just people who make art. We have the same challenge at GitHub. You know, we are the home of open source maintainers. We also have our own public goods funding challenge, where how do we maintain open source? How do we give money back to the maintainer of open source, the person who is putting their time, love, and sweat, building all these tools that the rest of us are using? And we have our GitHub sponsors program as one approach to it. But the reason why I'm excited mostly about Web3 is that the ideas that we've started with, we kind of see like a next evolution of that idea. If we could do it in such a way that the royalties involved, that every time somebody uses that open source repo and uses that content, maybe just a small smidge of a fraction of some cost goes back to the maintainer and the contributors, so we can actually solve public good. I think this is one of the challenges recently that has been tickling Vitalik's fancy. Like, how do we do public goods funding in a sustainable fashion? We've brought economics to everything else, but we still haven't quite really cracked the whip all the way and broken the thing wide open for technical creator communities, because that's what we are. We're talking about technical creator communities. And the entire Web3 would not even exist without the technical creator community, which has not been monetized at all. And there are people who feel like, oh, you don't need to monetize it. But we want people who, if they decide to truly spend all their time on open source and to be able to be compensated for the work that they do. It should be a choice that if this is what you want to do, we should come up with a system that allows you to do that. And we think we're doing just a little bit of that with GitHub sponsors, but we need even more, so that I want every technical creator to have a connection to their top 1,000 fans. Like, who are the top 1,000 fans of the technology you've built? Who are the people who really use it the most? Who are the people who value it the most? You could have an NFT around, a community, like create a community around that. And then that can sustain that ecosystem within itself.
So one of the really exciting projects that I follow is Gitcoin. I don't know if you've heard about Gitcoin.
Yeah, I've been following Gitcoin for a while as well. So Gitcoin,
amazing, yeah.
To that.
And what's fascinating about it is really large projects like decentralized networks and protocols in DeFi that are actually profitable are able to create what are called matching grants. So they can say, if you want to donate to open source projects that are building in the Web3 space, we'll match your grants to these projects. And so it's creating this, grassroots movement where people can just contribute small amounts of money to the projects they really love and they love using, or they want to see succeed, or they want to see built out. And then larger, entities like Web3 protocols and even for-profit corporations can contribute these matching grants that can help boost those contributions. And I really think that DAOs like this are going to become the future way that a lot of the open source projects are funded. It just makes sense. You can reach such a large audience. People can contribute whatever they can afford, whether it's just a few dollars or whether it's a few $1,000s for a company, and it just creates this really sustainable ecosystem that we've never really had before. I love GitHub, and I star the projects I love and I fork the projects I love all the time. But it's also I always feel like it's really hard for people to, if they already have a day job and they have an open source hobby project, for them to maintain that project long term. And so the long-term stability and sustainability of these projects is really important, and it's something we've lacked in the past. And outside of really big projects like Linux that of course get tons of support, but I think it would be fantastic. There's no reason why Linux itself couldn't use like Gitcoin to fund features and things that they want to see built into the Linux kernel. And there's so many examples of things like that where we could incentivize developers that want to contribute and incentivize the projects that want to grow, or bring resources to the projects that want to grow. So I'm really excited about those opportunities.
Yeah, the technical creator community is something most people think about, but it's a creator community, and it's been around for so long. We all use it. There are many ideas. Grants is one approach, but that requires altruism. Could we come up with another approach outside of grants, in addition to grants? Because when Blau gives you his music, you don't give a tip. You're buying access to that media. And it's the same concept. It's the same intellectual property, and figuring out a way to get the intellectual property out there in a decentralized fashion that all parties involved benefit. Because at the end of the day, what we're talking about, the true thing we're talking about, is this human coordination technology. And it's coordinating at the scale of the planet, whether it's media, whether it's software, whether it's conversation. Literally, that's what we're talking about. How do we keep on evolving human communication, coordination technology, and play these coordination games in a way that is sustainable and non-deleterious to the environment and society at large?
One of the things that is so important and key to all of these decentralized systems is the composability of them. And I think that is the model for making these projects sustainable. So the idea that as a software engineer or as a creator, I could create, a smart contract that lives forever on the Ethereum virtual machine or on the Ethereum network, and others can compose and build applications that might integrate with that, and they can transfer data and value between my application and theirs. And it's created this entire, ecosystem of like Lego blocks that are all built on top of each other and all composable. And we see, the first use case is really finance, and we see this in decentralized finance. All of these protocols are building new financial, new financial primitives on top of each other, and they're composing each other in the similar ways to like the web first started. And so, just like bringing, the World Wide Web is all of a sudden everyone could hyperlink to each other. In smart contracts, everyone can now compose with each other and transfer this data and value in unique ways. And I think this is the model. Creators can create pieces of code that live forever, that are immutable, and that can, do interesting things. And then others will integrate with those. And that creator could potentially have like an ongoing royalty stream from whatever useful function their code does. And so that can solve the, the long-term maintainability problem challenge of open source, and it can also solve, how do we compensate these creators who are just basically giving us all this work for free today?
All right, world, you've heard it here on the GitHub Web3 community call. Omoju and Luke have invented a new way. When you write your code, embedded in your smart contract should be this idea of royalties embedded in it. I really think that is a very sustainable model. If you put it on chain and you originate it, you mint.
Yeah.
I think minting is going to become a verb. Just like I'm going to Uber there is now a verb, or let me Google that. I think minting will literally become a verb where everything is minted. So when you ship something, you mint it first and then you deploy. Yeah. And so it's immutable. If you have to do a patch, you do a patch. These are very, very, very fascinating ideas. And I can see people, everyone spending ridiculous amount of hours trying what these ideas are. What does it mean to actually compose not just smart contracts in a DeFi environment, but to make all software truly, truly, truly composable in the sense of already software is composable. They have APIs. However, the APIs can be shut off. They can be throttled, all this stuff. What if you had unlimited APIs to everything in the code base and you put that on chain? What does that even look like?
And that's kind of what we have, I think, with these permissionless networks, in the sense that we can actually, I can deploy a smart contract on chain, and any other contract can read my storage, the data I've stored, and that will live forever. And so we're composable in that way. And we also have this unique thing where most of the people that deploy contracts or originate contracts, they make them open source. So they're not just deploying the bytecode; they're giving you the source code, which reminds me of the early days of the web. Things have changed with JavaScript and compiled bytecode and everything, but it used to be you could just view the source of any website and see exactly how it was made.
I used to do that. Just view the source and you just take it and then you rejig it up and you reuse it.
And so in many ways, Ethereum is the same way, in that I can just view the source of almost any contract on Ethereum, and I can figure out, I can learn from it. I can fork it. I can build my own version of it. I can compose with it. I can integrate with it, And so all of these things are possible in a way that's like trustless and isn't going, that contract's not going to go away because someone didn't pay their hosting bill tomorrow, right? And that's really powerful. Composing with things that are permanent is also a really powerful concept, in the sense that the web, I think, was meant to be permanent, but then we found that data tends to decay and content tends to disappear over time, right?
Yeah, that's why we have the Wayback Machine, something to just archive it. It goes away. And so as we're going and we're talking about these networks and the stuff that you're doing, what are the areas now that you're most fascinated by? Where are you spending your free time thinking about?
So I can't say that I'm actually working on projects in this space, but I think a lot about where things are headed.
Mm-hmm.
And we were talking earlier about this, and you know, it's the tagline in my Twitter bio is that the universe is non-fungible. And I really think we're headed to a world in the next, you know, decade or so where every item in the physical and digital world will have a token representing it.
Mm-hmm.
And so this will allow us to do all kinds of things. For example, if I own property in the real world, I could fractionalize it and I could sell part of it to people. I could maybe use it to take out a loan. I can transfer value and I can transfer real world objects back and forth between people without having to worry about you know, these archaic like property and title rights databases that are stored by some government and on a mainframe somewhere, right? And so this can create this global registry of every object in the universe, in the metaverse as well, in the physical and digital universe. And I think this is super powerful, and it's just going to enable so many use cases we can't even really think about today. You know, what about fractional ownership of a car, right? Like, what if you know, this could create new models for renting cars, and like think about all the sharing economy aspects of you know, decentralized versions of Airbnb, Uber, Lyft. All of these things are inevitable. And imagine, for example, this is one of the things that gets me really excited. I'm sure someone's going to build this, or there's probably 3 people building this already. But what about a ride DAO where, you know, drivers, riders, basically are all members of the DAO. They all share ownership and they're all compensated. And instead of like these large corporations like Uber and Lyft, they're basically extracting all the profit from both the drivers and riders. And paying the drivers the bare minimum. What if drivers and riders were able to vote on what a fair, what it should cost for a ride? And what if drivers actually had ownership equity in the DAO, and they could actually have, you know, life-changing wealth, or earn life-changing wealth by simply becoming an owner of the DAO that they've driven for years, and earning tokens for delivering food, giving rides. All these things are possible. And we're going to see decentralized versions of all the sharing economy pop up. I think that's inevitable, and it will probably happen in the next several years.
I agree with you. I really tend to agree with you. Like the companies we have today are not necessarily the enemy. They have evolved in a system that this is what we've known. And like there was no other way to get funding. You had to go get funding through venture capital. And that comes with strings attached. You have to have hyper growth. You have to do all these things. It's the shareholder model that we're satisfying. And we want to satisfy a different kind of model. We want to evolve that model into something. There was a time when there was no shareholder model, where there was not a joint stock company. So it's just the evolution of human coordination around work. This is the next evolution of that. And I'm very excited that this evolution is centered and powered specifically by code, by mathematics, by something that we all agree upon, and that it is planetary wide. The thing that makes this very exciting in the world of everything is non-fungible, then the idea of a boundary of a nation kind of melts away. So then I have this global ledger of items in the world. And the interesting thing is, what does that become? What do I do when I have a global ledger? And my ledger is no longer limited to my district or my country. And I think this is the biggest issue about Web3 technology and the nation state, because it's pushing the boundaries of what it means to actually be a nation state. And maybe we have to evolve that concept as well.
Absolutely. That's super interesting. I think the fundamental difference is that traditionally, you know, when we wanted to coordinate, like let's say a large company, there's a physical limit to how many people could physically meet in a location, you know, and coordinate with each other and just make decisions and decide how to operate the company. But now with this new technology, we can coordinate with hundreds or thousands of people globally, and they can be anywhere in the world, and we can all vote on how we want to proceed. And so it's increase the coordination from, a dozen people or so with these large companies to potentially thousands or millions. And that opens up all these opportunities for more collaboration and more fair systems to develop that aren't just controlled by, a dozen or so board of directors of some corporation. People have ownership, and not that these big companies are bad. It's just that's what we've evolved from.
That's the best we have of what we've done so far. And that was better than everything that existed before. We're not in a feudalist society. We don't want to go back to feudalism. And we want to keep evolving these things, but it's all around coordination. If you don't have a mechanism for coordination at scale, you can't make these giant leaps. You can't access new markets. And the idea that you go to school, you learn mathematics, you learn cryptography. Well, I'll speak for myself. I am an undergraduate student sitting in my computer science class, learning cryptography, learning all these things. But I learned them in a vacuum. I don't think I understood the application and the impact it can actually have on society. So if I could go back again and redo undergraduate curriculum in computer science, I think there needs to be strong application-based approach of applications in society. So cryptography is not just about passing messages and a third party can know. That is the fundamental what it is and trust. But what is the impact and being able to think through what that technology enables? And that has been the leap that most of us have not made. And I guess that's why we all really understood the pivotal thing that was the Bitcoin white paper.
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating to me how, by creating a trustless, permissionless database, and Bitcoin is probably the first really successful example of this, where people could transfer value, and money is probably the first and most popular use case, where people could transfer value in a trustless way, and it was irreversible and it was not censorable, and that whole concept, moving forward into Web3 and the world computer, and letting everyone interact with a global database, which is really just what it is, in a trustless and permissionless way is really incredible, and it's empowering because now the coordination aspects are just incredible. Digital voting, and you can imagine it. I think we were talking earlier about how this could even extend to improving governments and the ways they can coordinate with their citizens, even small local towns. Imagine if every citizen could just vote in real time on issues. It would be so incredible. There's no reason why we can't.
Even if that was the case, it wouldn't happen, because even now with a lot of the Web3 communities, if you look at the histogram of votes and who votes, it's a small percentage and a very long tail. Most people do not participate in governance. So there's still we have the technology now. Now we need to solve participation. People do not participate in governance. We all say we want it, but we don't. It's only until somebody rails on Twitter and comes up with something that's outrageous, then we all run and go vote on that proposal. But for the most part, just like we do in regular politics, people just kind of, it kind of works, I'm not going to vote. How many people write?
There is governance fatigue.
Yeah, how many people write proposals, number one?
Yeah.
And then how do you incentivize people to vote on those proposals?
I think we have to evolve the system, the coordination systems and the governance systems to accommodate this, because I think this is a real problem. Governance fatigue. Nobody wants to vote on. So imagine a large company, and they have their shareholder elections, and but imagine if they made every shareholder in the large company vote on paying $100 invoice to some vendor, right? They would never do that because it would be a crazy amount of things you'd have to vote on. But that's sort of the way that DAOs are operating today. Everyone is voting on every tiny thing, whether they need to or not. And so I've seen some interesting ideas on how to solve this. One that I saw is called Orca Protocol, which is basically a DAO framework. And they're building a system where you can create pods of individual, you think of them like sub teams within a DAO. Yeah. So, you might have an accounting pod that those are the people that have to vote to approve that $100 invoice. Not necessarily everyone in the DAO. You don't have to have thousands of people vote on this. And so they can create small pods of people that can vote on things that they have knowledge of or have experience and should be voting on. And so I think we'll see these systems of governance and coordination evolve to where it should be easy. You shouldn't have to vote on all the minutia of day-to-day operations of the DAO that you don't really care about or that isn't relevant to you as a contributor, but you should be able to vote in the areas that matter and are important to you as a contributor. And so if you're working on a small pod that's maybe developing new software features for the DAO, maybe you're voting on like what features get shipped or what features get merged into your project next week. And so that might be one area of the pod coordinates, or the finance and accounting, of course, is another area. So I think we'll see these coordination systems evolve, and it's pretty exciting to see what's happening in such a short time. It's also
very short time. It's like we're basically recreating government, and there's a reason why it's called governance. It's the same thing, but it's like it's a different kind of space where you can experiment with governance structures very rapidly.
Yeah. Omoju, changing topics, maybe it might be really interesting to talk in the last few minutes about what the developer experience is like for spinning up a new Web3 project, and what are some of the tools that people could leverage to make their to make it easy to get started, because GitHub has a lot of great ones.
Yeah. So when we talk about composability and developer experience and getting started and doing your Legos, the first thing that obviously comes to mind is GitHub, because GitHub itself was founded on Git and just building layers around Git to make it much more usable, and for all of us to be able to coordinate doing open source work, and for you to be able to fork a repo and actually get all these things and you can get it going. I think one of the most powerful aspects of doing work in Web3 is finding a project you care about that you're interested in, and literally taking that project and forking that repo and trying to deploy your version of that project in a testnet. And the barrier to entry isn't that high, because you just have to fork it. Hopefully, if they have good documentation, you can actually get through and see if you can deploy it in a testnet and start changing things, and just start fiddling about and changing things, and then evolving the thing you want to build from there. From your
That's a great way to get started.
Yeah. From your experience, what has been a good way to start?
Absolutely. That's probably the best way, is just to fork an existing project and deploy to testnet. And then as you like, I spent a lot of time in my career working on DevOps and like CI/CD and continuous integration, continuous delivery. And I think it's really great to build a deployment pipeline, and you can do this really easily in GitHub, right? So you can take your project, you can create a GitHub action so that every time you check in code, your project will be automatically published as a GitHub page. And so now your front end is automatically updated every time you make a commit to your repository. So you have continuous delivery of your application. So that's one way that's really, that's one way to get started. And then on the back end, in terms of Web3 applications, typically don't have like a standard Postgres or MySQL database behind them like a LAMP stack would, right? And so you're going to need probably some backend data services. And in the Web3 world, there's a few that you would need. So first of all, you would need an Ethereum node service to talk to, or to run your own Ethereum node. But most developers would not probably want to run their own Ethereum node. So you can get started for free with an account from Alchemy API or Infura, which will give you something like 100,000 requests per day, which is just fine if you're building an application that you want to experiment with and test for a few users. When you graduate to maybe having an application that's on mainnet and ready to serve, thousands of users, then you want to perhaps look at a more robust node service. And at Coinbase, we offer, Coinbase Cloud. We have query and transact clusters where you can build large, highly scalable clusters of Ethereum nodes. And of course, you can also get larger plans from Alchemy API and Infura as well. So node service is important. And then there are also other services in the data layer that are important. And I see a lot of Web3 projects using Graph protocol. So Graph protocol is basically a decentralized network of people that index the Ethereum blockchain, and they create subgraphs, which are just really like GraphQL resources that you can query just like any GraphQL API on the internet. And so it's a really great way to get responsive, highly performant data from protocols like Uniswap and others. If you want to know like what's the market price of all these tokens on Uniswap, you can
Oh,
pull all this information in from the Graph protocol into your front end. And so I think that combination of like GitHub pages that's automatically updated whenever you commit,
pages,
and then the back end of like
Infura,
Web3, Infura,
Graph.
Alchemy API, or Coinbase Cloud, and Graph protocol is a really powerful combination that I see in a lot of Web3 projects. And then, of course, if you're building an NFT project, you should probably look into Arweave or IPFS for your image hosting. Not all NFTs are hosted on these decentralized networks, but you should look into those. So that's sort of the stack as I see it.
Yeah. What about if you wanted to start not in layer 1, but layer 2?
Layer 2 is very similar in the sense that you can originate a smart contract on something like Arbitrum in a very similar way to just originating a smart contract on the Ethereum mainnet. And so absolutely, layer 2 is a great place to get started. Another place to get started where fees are low is side chains like Polygon and Avalanche. These side chains are Ethereum compatible, so the same smart contracts run there, and you pay pennies per transaction, and they're very fast and performant. And so the Avalanche ecosystem is really fantastic right now. You can do transactions for like 10 or 20 cents each. It's very fast. Your transactions confirm in like a second. And so a lot of these projects are just starting to launch on these side chains first because the mainnet fees are so high. You don't want to pay $200 a transaction. So I see a lot of that lately.
Yeah. So everyone, you heard about this now. The stack is not that complicated. Once you think about, okay, I need to store something. Where do you want to store it? Maybe you want to use Arweave, IPFS. That's a storage layer. You need a node service. You can use Ethereum node service. You can use it through Coinbase. You can use it through Infura. You can use it through all these people. That's that. You need your front end. You can just use GitHub pages. You need your DevOps pipeline. Use GitHub Actions. So you can get something to at least testnet. And I think that's the challenge that I'm going to ask people to do. Take a project that you're excited about, that you're curious about, fork that project, redeploy it all the way to testnet, and go through the stages and integrate into Graph protocol and just pull some information from Uniswap or somewhere and just get the process going of building, becoming, if you're not already a person, you're becoming a Web3 builder. And once you get over that initial hump, then the ideas can start pouring and you can start experimenting even more. So everybody, go fork a project, deploy to testnet, mess around with it, and then start letting the ideas flow. So this is the last 10 seconds. Thank you for coming to speak with me today, Luke. I was such a exciting, unpeeling, let's just peel back the layers and see what's going on under here. So thank you so much. And that's it. And we will be back next week with another episode for you all. Thank you all.
Thank
Bye.
you, Omoju. It was so much fun. Bye.
you.